The first shell came in flat, scraping the pines, and the squad scattered into the loam before the boom rolled across the ridge. Corporal Eli Hartman was already on his knees beside a kid named Wisniewski when the second round hit, and the snow that had been holding the woods together turned to wet smoke. Hartman pressed both palms into the boy's thigh and shouted for someone, anyone, to bring up the litter. The medic was a representative figure of his trade, one of thousands of U.S. Army aidmen who carried morphine syrets and sulfur packets into the Hurtgen forest in November of 1944. His helmet had a red cross painted on a white circle, but the Germans on the far slope had stopped honoring the cross weeks ago. He knew that. He kept his head down anyway and worked. Sergeant Boyle slid in next to him on his belly, rifle slung. How bad? Femoral, nicked, not severed. Hartman tied the bandage off and felt the kid's pulse jump under his fingers. He needs a litter team and he needs it 5 minutes ago. 5 minutes ago we were drinking coffee, Boyle said, and he was already crawling back toward the radio. There were 8 men left in the squad. Wisniewski made it 9 if you counted the wounded, and Hartman always counted the wounded. They had been pushed into the trees 3 days earlier with an order that had come down through 3 echelons before it reached them, an order that said the road through Vossenac must be opened by the morning of the 4th day. Nobody up the chain had told them how. The trees did the telling. Tall, black pine, packed close, with shells bursting in the upper branches and sending steel down like rain. Doc, Private Lefferts crawled over, one eye squeezed shut against the smoke. Mendez took one in the shoulder. Bring him. He's walking. Then walk him. Hartman finished the tourniquet on Wisniewski's thigh and rolled the kid onto his side. The boy's mouth was working, words half-formed. Mama, mama. Hartman had heard the word in 3 languages now, and it always sounded the same. He patted the kid's cheek and said the lie that the manual did not list. You're going home. You hear me? You're going home. Boyle came sliding back. Battalion says, hold the line until first light. No litter team. Roads are cut. Cut by what? By the Germans being 200 yards downhill and us being uphill and them having the better idea about that. Mendez arrived under Lefferts' arm, grey-faced, the front of his field jacket soaked black. Hartman opened the jacket with his trench shears and probed the wound with 2 fingers. The bullet had gone through clean. He packed it with sulfur and folded a dressing over both sides and tied it tight enough to make Mendez grunt. How am I, Doc? Lucky. The bone said, no thank you. Keep your arm against your chest. You shoot left-handed? I shoot like I shoot. Then shoot. Hartman turned to count what he had. Wisniewski on the ground. Mendez upright but slow. Boyle on the radio. Lefferts at the perimeter. Privates Kowalski, Boudreau, and Ferrara along the log. Lieutenant Pierce, the new one, 22 years old, with 2 weeks of combat experience and a face that had not figured out yet how to lie about it. Pierce crawled over. Hartman, tell me what you need. It was the right question. Hartman respected him for asking it. I need this kid out of these woods by dawn. I need plasma. I need a stretcher team. None of that is coming. So I need everybody who can still pull a trigger to stay alive until I can think of something. That a plan? That's a start. The next hour was small things. Hartman moved from man to man with the canvas bag against his hip, checking dressings, refilling canteens from a broken jerry can, splinting Boudreau's wrist where a tree branch had come down on him. He listened. That was half the job, the medic's job, listening. Boyle was breathing too fast. Kowalski had stopped talking. Ferrara was telling a joke about a Brooklyn cabbie for the 3rd time. Hartman logged each of them in his head the way another man might log expense receipts. He was 26 years old, and he had been keeping this ledger since Omaha Beach, a private ledger that ran in a column down the inside of his skull. The names that had been added, the names that had been crossed off. A mortar crumped 50 yards out and a tree came down. Hartman heard the snap before he heard the shell. He was already moving. Ferrara was under the trunk. The wood had taken him across the hips and pinned him to the frozen ground. Hartman skidded into the snow beside him and pushed his hand under the branch. He could feel a wet warmth. He could feel the bone. Doc. Ferrara was very calm, which was the worst sign. Doc, I can't feel my legs. I know. Tell me I can feel my legs. You can feel your legs. Hold still. Boyle and Kowalski got the trunk up with a pry bar made from a bayonet and a length of fence wire and a prayer. Hartman dragged Ferrara clear. He worked fast and he worked dirty. The pelvis was crushed. The bleeding inside would kill him long before any litter team could carry him to an aid station that didn't exist on a road that was cut. Hartman gave him a full syringe of morphine and then a second one, and Ferrara looked up at him with the eyes of a man who had figured it out. "Don't lie to me, Doc." Hartman did not lie. "Stay with me," he said instead. "Tell me about the cabbie." Ferrara told the joke. He told it slow. He got to the punchline and laughed, and the laugh turned wet, and Hartman held his hand until the squeeze went out of it. Then he closed the eyes and said the short prayer he had been taught by a chaplain at San Lo, whose name he no longer remembered. He stood up. He went back to work. Boyle was watching him. "Doc, don't." "Doc, I said don't." Hartman wiped his hands on his trousers. "Wisniewski's still alive. Mendez is still alive. We are still alive. That's the math." It was not the math, exactly. The math was that an order had come down to open the road by morning and somebody had decided 8 men were enough. Hartman had stopped arguing with that kind of math a long time ago. He worked inside it instead. Boudreaux crawled in from the perimeter with blood on his sleeve. He had taken a graze along the ribs. Hartman ran 2 fingers along the wound and shook his head. "You're fine. You're scared. There's a difference." "I know the difference, Doc." "Then sit down for 2 minutes and let your heart slow." Boudreaux sat. He was a kid from Louisiana with a St. Christopher medal around his neck. Hartman looked at him, and for 1/2 second the ledger swam in front of him, and he had to close his eyes. He opened them. He kept working. That was the rule. Pierce came over. He had his map out. "There's a logging trail down the back of the ridge. If we can hold the line for 3 more hours, the rest of Easy Company might reach the spur." "Might. It's what I've got." Hartman looked at the map. He looked at the kid. He looked at Wisniewski's pale face, and at Mendez's grey one, and at the 4 other men who would have to fight to keep the perimeter alive until dawn. "Lieutenant," he said, "I'm going to ask you something, and you're going to listen to me as a soldier, not a sergeant. Go." "There's a German aid station I can see from the rise. 200 yards, white flag with a red cross. I saw it through the glass an hour ago. They've got plasma, they've got a litter." Pierce's face did the calculation. "You can't go to a German aid station. They took an oath. Same as me. They've been shooting medics for a month. Not all of them. Not the doctors. The doctors take the same oath." "Hartman, I'm going to ask the lieutenant," Hartman said very quietly, "to let me take Wisniewski down the line under a white rag. Just me. Just the kid. If they shoot me, they shoot me. If they don't, the kid lives and I come back with plasma." Pierce stared at him. "That's a deserter's plan. That's a medic's plan, sir." There was a long silence. The forest cracked around them. Somewhere a machine gun opened up and stopped. 20 minutes, Pierce said. "If you're not back in 2 hours under a flag, I will tell your mother you died holding a line." "My mother is dead, sir." "Then I will tell mine." Hartman strapped Wisniewski to a folded poncho and tied it off into a drag sled the way the aid men had learned in Italy. He took a stick and tied a piece of white parachute silk to it, the silk from the supply drop on the second morning. He took off his helmet and tied the bandage around his arm so the red cross showed. He went down the slope alone with a wounded kid behind him and a stick in his hand. The pines opened. The snow was a clean blue color in the half-light. He walked. He whistled once, low, just to hear something human. Wisniewski moaned. Hartman pulled the sled. A German voice called out from the trees. A rifle bolt clicked. Hartman kept walking. "Sanitator," he said. "Verwundeter." He had 2 German words and he used both of them. A second voice answered, sharper, and a young German with a Red Cross armband stepped out from behind a stump. He was maybe 19. He had a face that looked like Wisniewski's face if you scrubbed off the mud and changed the helmet. He looked at Hartman. He looked at the kid on the sled. He looked at the stick with the silk on it. He lowered the rifle. The aid station was a dugout under a fallen oak. There were 3 Germans on stretchers and 1 on a table and 2 doctors with their sleeves rolled. Hartman came in with Wisniewski and stood in the doorway with the snow blowing in behind him. The senior German doctor looked at him for a long second. Then he pointed at the table next to his own. "Femur," Hartman said. "Femoral artery nicked, not severed. Pulse? Thready. Holding." The German nodded. They worked side by side for the next 40 minutes, the German with one hand on Wisniewski's wound and Hartman with the other, and neither of them said one word about the war. The German tied a knot Hartman had never seen before, a clever little double turn that locked itself off, and Hartman filed it away in his ledger under things to remember. When the kid was stable, the German wiped his hands and looked at him. "You came alone?" "Yes." "You are foolish." "I am a medic." The German smiled. It was a small, tired smile. He went to a wooden crate against the wall and pulled out 4 glass bottles of plasma and 2 collapsible litters and a roll of gauze the size of a man's thigh. He set them on the table. Take these. I cannot pay. You paid by walking down the hill. Take them. There is a war on, Sanitata. Maybe one day there will not be. Take them now. Hartman took them. He did not say thank you. The thank you would have insulted the work. He went up the steps and out into the cold. He went back up the slope with 2 litters strapped across his shoulders and 4 bottles in his coat and the kid still alive behind him. Halfway up, he heard a rifle bolt work in the trees on his left, and he froze with the white silk held high. The voice that came back to him was American. Doc? That you? It was Lefferts. He had crawled forward to cover Hartman's return against orders with a garand and a half-frozen canteen. You shouldn't be out here, Hartman said. Neither should you, Doc. But here we are. Lefferts took one of the litters off his shoulder. They walked the last 100 yards together. Halfway up, a German machine gun opened up on the next ridge, a sound like wet canvas tearing, and Hartman flinched and kept walking. He had decided weeks ago that the only way to do this work was to walk. If a man with a red cross on his arm started to run, he was a moving target. If he walked, he was a question. He came into the perimeter under the white silk, and Pierce stood up out of the snow and stared at him. You're back. I'm back. With supplies. With supplies. Pierce did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, I will not put this in the report. They would not believe it. Don't put it in the report, Hartman said. Put it in the ledger. He went to work. He hung a plasma bottle from a bayonet driven into the frozen earth and watched the clear fluid trickle into Mendez's vein. Mendez opened his eyes and asked in a thin voice whether the doc had walked into the German line. Hartman said he had walked into a doctor's line, which was a different line, and Mendez seemed to understand and went back to sleep. Then Hartman moved on. He put plasma into a man named Sandowski he hadn't even known was hit, a quiet rifleman from Wisconsin who had been bleeding into his boot for an hour and had not said one word about it because Ferrara had been louder. He stabilized 2 more before the first grey light came over the ridge. He saw Boyle alive, he saw Kowalski alive, he saw Lefferts alive. He went and stood for 1 minute beside Ferrara's body, and he closed the ledger on that name. The road through Vossenac was opened by mid-morning of the 4th day, not by Hartman's squad alone, but by what was left of his squad and the rest of Easy Company who came up the spur trail when the fog lifted. The historians would later say the Hurtgen Forest was a battle of forgotten men in a forgotten woods, that the cost did not match the gain, that the planners had been wrong about almost everything. The historians would be right. But Wisniewski went home. He walked off a Liberty ship in New York in the spring of 1946 on a cane, and he lived to be 81 years old. Mendez went home. He raised 4 children in El Paso, and one of them became a doctor. Sandowski went home. He never spoke of the Hurtgen Forest until he was very old, and then he spoke of it only once, to a granddaughter, and what he told her was about a medic who went down a hill alone under a white rag and came back with plasma. Hartman himself was killed 11 weeks later in the Ardennes, in a forest much like the one in this story, by a piece of shrapnel that he did not see and could not have dodged. The aidman who recovered his body found his canvas bag half empty, which meant he had been working when he died. They found his helmet with its red cross. They found a small leather notebook in his pocket in which he had been keeping a list of names in 2 columns, the names that had been added and the names that had been crossed off. Beside Ferrara's name, in the 2nd column, he had drawn a small, careful star. The question this story asks, who is worth saving, when the ledger forces a choice, was not a question Hartman answered out loud. He answered it the way a brother answers it, which is to say, by not asking it at all. The man in front of you is the man you save. The next man after that is the next man you save. The ledger keeps itself. You do the work. Long after the war, in a town in Pennsylvania, an old man named Wisniewski sat on a porch and told his great-grandson about a corporal who had carried him out of a forest. He did not know the corporal's full name. He did not know where the corporal was buried, but he knew the corporal had said one thing. Kneeling beside him in the snow with his palm on the wound and the world coming down around them in pieces, and the old man on the porch repeated it to the boy the way you repeat a prayer. You're going home, the old man said. You hear me? You're going home. And the boy, who was 8 years old and had never seen a war, looked up at his great-grandfather and understood, in the small wordless way that children understand these things, that he had been carried out of those woods too. That a brother in a Red Cross helmet had gone down a hill alone with a white rag on a stick, and that the line of people alive because of him would not end while any of them remembered to tell the story. The medic was a composite figure. The forest was real, the forest is still there, so is the road, so are the men who went home.